So today I'm going to give a little background on British Romanticism. So I know that the official name for our course is Sequence 4, late 18th to mid 19th century, but my unofficial name for the class is Transatlantic Romanticism, 1789 to 1861. So I'm going to first talk a little bit about that. So what do I mean by transatlantic? Well, transatlanticism is very big in critical studies. You'll also hear about cisatlantic studies, circumatlantic studies, transatlantic, but it basically looks at sites focusing on their relationship with sites that they are divided from, but also connected to by the Atlantic Ocean. So cisatlantic studies focus on one site on the Atlantic Ocean, circumatlantic focuses on multiple sites, and trans focuses on two sites. So the two sites that our class is going to be focusing on is Britain and the United States. So as far as the second part of the title, Romanticism, I want to talk a little bit about what that means. Because when I tell people I teach romantic literature, I think they get ideas about candlelight and soft music and books about love, but that's romantic with a little r. Romantic with a big R refers to this period, and they got this name because later periods felt that these writers had a lot of the qualities of early writers of the romance genre. Romances like you probably read in Sequence 2. So you know that those had that name because they were often written in languages like French that evolved from the Latin of Rome. And romances are highly imaginative works. So maybe you can think of chivalric romances. I believe that you might have read The Fairy Queen. You know that these works are really larger than life. The heroes are the bravest, the strongest, the most pure. The heroines are the most beautiful, the most chaste, the most wonderful. They are not very realistic. So romantic is kind of like the opposite of realistic. It's highly imaginative. So a lot of the works, the British and the American works that we're going to read in this class have that spirit of larger than life, imaginative romanticism. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the dates of the class, and I will pull up our Canvas site to remind you that the British Romantic period begins in 1789 with the outbreak of the French Revolution, and it extends to 1832 with the passage of the Reform Bill in Britain, and that extended the right to vote to the common man. And then in America, the Romantic period extends from 1828, the election of President Andrew Jackson, who was an advocate of populism or the common man. And it ends at 1861 with the beginning of the Civil War. Now, this is a little unusual for the organization because the first half of our class is all about British literature. All the readings from the first half of our class are going to come from your English Norton, with the exception of our novel, but it's an English novel, Jane Austen's Persuasion. So the first half of our class is about British Romanticism, and that's what your midterm is going to cover. The second half of our class is about American Romanticism. So all of our readings are going to come from the American Norton, and that's what your final exam is going to cover. It's not cumulative. So this is a little weird because sequence classes, when they handle British and American literature, they usually integrate them. When I teach sequence 3, I always like to pair a British work with an American work that has similar themes. But all the sequence 4 classes taught in our English department have this organization. And You know, one of the good things about it is that the course has a unifying theme of Romanticism. And as I mentioned here in the write-up, the British and American Romantic period shared features like appreciating emotion and imagination over rigid reason, a reverence for physical nature, and an opposition towards traditional institutions of oppression, class oppression, gender oppression, racial oppression. So that's a good part. There's a unifying theme to these two romantic periods. But the bad part is that things get left out. And I know that that's always the case in a survey class. But for example, we will not be reading any American writers before the 1830s. So we won't be reading any American writers from the America's early national period, like Washington Irving and James Fenimore Cooper. But don't worry, these authors are in your American anthology, and if you want to read them, I definitely encourage you to. Now, as far as our British authors, we are not going to be reading any British authors after the 1820s. So we are going to be, missing the British Victorian period. Queen Victoria reigned from 1837 to 1901. But never fear, your Sequence 5 class focuses on Victorianism, and it will backtrack and pick up some of the authors that we missed. All right, so British Romanticism starts out with the French Revolution, and you don't have to memorize a lot of dates in this class, but one date that you should know is July 14th, 1789, Bastille Day, the storming of the political prison, the Bastille, that tipped off the French Revolution. And you should also know 1793. Specifically September of 1793, when the ideals of the French Revolution kind of start to deteriorate into the violence of a period that we call the Terror, or the Reign of Terror. So I'm going to pause now, because I have a video that's on the French Revolution, and I think it'll also be a nice change of pace for you to get to hear voices other than Dr. Allen's, and I'll talk about it on the other side.